Hey, and welcome back to another video. In today's tutorial, we're going to talk all about how to style your Pandas data frame. So we're going to talk about how to apply different cell formatting options to your data frame, such as currencies, percentages, and zero padding. We're also going to be talking about how to highlight different text and background colors based on different values, such as the minimum or maximum values or a range. Then we're going to include some custom rules for formatting so you can really dive into how you want to customize the Pandas styling that you have. Then we'll talk about how to apply color maps, such as creating heat maps in your Pandas data frame based on the values in those cells. Then we'll talk about how to add bars in order to be able to display the different distributions of your data throughout your Pandas data frame. And finally, we're going to talk about how to save and share your style across different data frames in order to make your work a little bit easier. So let's dive in and get started. So we're going to start off by loading this data frame, and it includes different data on different regions as well as different types of sales. And what we're going to include are some currency values here that are formatted as integers, the number of sales, which are also integers, and then we're going to be calculating the percentage of the total sales that each category represents. So let's run this and take a look at what our data frame looks like. And I have this code directly in the description below, so if you want to follow along, just copy and paste it into your favorite code editor. All right, so what we can see here is that we now have 5 different columns. We have a column for region, a column for the different types of sales. Then we have this column sum sales here, which should represent a dollar value. We have this num sales here, which just represents numbers. And we have percent sales here, which technically represents a percentage of different values. So let's take a look in our first section here about how to apply cell formatting to different cells in our data frame. So the first thing that we'll take a look at is actually applying currency formatting to our data. So Pandas has this very neat style attribute that we can access. So we can type df style, and this opens us up to being able to work with different pieces in regards to the styling of our data frame. So let's call the format function here, and we're going to pass in a dictionary related just to a particular column that we want to apply formatting to. So what we're going to do is access the sum sales column here, and we're going to pass in a formatted string here. And so the way that this works is we're able to pass in the string formatting that we want to apply. So in this case, we want the number to show up, and then we want it to be with 0 decimal places. And so let's run this and see what it looks like. So we can see that it's actually applied this comma separation as well as the $sign at the front of it. So these string formats can be a little bit intimidating at first, but once you get the hang of them, they make a bit more sense, and there's no harm in always looking them up as well. So what we've done here actually is changed how these values are represented without actually changing them to strings. So we're still able to add them up in different ways and being able to apply all of those great numeric operations to them. So let's take a look at what we can do here. I'm just going to copy this so we don't lose this. But now let's apply some percentage formatting as well. So what we can actually do is pass in another column here into our dictionary. So in this case, what we want to do is apply it to this percent sales column. And so what we can write now is another formatted string here. And in this case, our formatted string is going to take the format of a 2 decimal place with a percent sign here. This percent sign will actually take care of multiplying everything by 100 to make it print out nicely as a percentage. So when we run this, we can see that it's actually formatted everything to a really nice percentage style format with 2 decimal places. If we didn't want these decimal places, we could simply get rid of them. We can see that it's a nicely rounded percentage point here. So in this last piece that we're going to take a look at is actually just applying 0 padding to this. And this is really, in this case, just for illustration purposes, but say we wanted each of these values to be at least 3 characters long. And we can pad them with zeros by typing num sales, and then we can pass in this string formatting here, which says that we want to pass in at least 3 digits, and if there aren't 3 digits, to pad them with zeros. So when we run this, and we actually need to paste this into the curly braces, when we run this, we can see that it's actually applied this really nice padding here so that all of them are the exact same length. And again, remember that we didn't actually change anything about the underlying values here, only the representation of these values. So you don't lose any of the meaningful information that this represents. So one of the things that we can actually do is, because this really just represents a dictionary here, is we can take this dictionary and we can call this or assign it to a variable. So we can say, for example, column formatters, and then paste in this dictionary. So now when we want to apply this later on, rather than having this entire piece clunking up our code lines here, we can actually just call the style and format method and paste in or reference that dictionary in order to be able to style it in exactly the same way that we have been before. Okay, so we've covered off how to format your different numbers in various different ways. So what we're going to do now is talk about how to highlight different values in a Pandas data frame using color. And this can be a great way to facilitate your exploratory data analysis, to be able to see trends in your data or find extreme values or missing values by drawing them out using color. So one of the things that we can actually do is find maximum values, and Pandas has a really great method in order to be able to facilitate this. So the way that we can do this is, again, by using the style attribute here, and now we can call the highlight max method. And so if we just run this with the default parameters, what we're going to see is it's actually going to highlight the maximum value in this. And what we're noticing here is that something strange is actually happening, because it's actually trying to find what the maximum value in a string column is. What we may want to do is actually only target the subset of columns that are relevant to this. And so the highlight max method actually accepts a subset parameter where we can list out the columns that we want to use. So let's make this a little cleaner by defining a new variable that contains all of the columns that we want to target. So we can call this numeric columns, and we can pass in sum sales and num sales and percent sales. And now in here we can reference this subset of columns. And when we do this now, we can see that only these values here have been highlighted. Now this yellow, to me at least personally, is very grating. So what we can actually do is define a different color here. So we can use the color parameter here to pass in either a named color or a hex value for a different color. So say we wanted to color these in light green, then we can see that we get this much more pleasant value here. So one of the things that we may want to do is also being able to find the minimum values. So the way that we can actually do this is by using the highlight min method. So let's take this code here and just paste it into the cell down here. And then we're going to change this max to min. And just to be a little bit different, we're going to use red here to highlight the minimum values. So when we run this, we can see that these values here represent the minimum values in our data. But what if we wanted to be able to apply multiple styles? So say we wanted to take this maximum value up here, and we will also want it to be able to highlight the minimum value. So let's just see what happens when we paste these below one another. When we run this now, we can see that it actually only highlights the minimum values. So what we need to do is actually chain these methods together. So what we can do is get rid of these two pieces here, and then just chain them like this. And so when we do this now, we can see that we get this we get both of the highlighting options applied. We get the maximum values highlighted up here and the minimum values highlighted down here. This is starting to look a little messy. So what we can actually do is use some line breaks in here in order to be able to apply our styles in a much cleaner way. So before this period, what we're going to do is put this slash here, and this allows us to be able to ignore any of the white space that follows. So it ignores the line break that exists here now. And we can do the same thing here. And now our code's much easier to read because we're able to see that we want to apply the style, or we want to access the style attribute here. And then we want to apply first the highlight max method and then the highlight min method. So when we run this, we get the exact same result, but we're able to actually follow along what's happening with our code. What's more is we can actually even apply the cell formatting that we used before and chain it in as well. So let's scroll back up, and we're going to take these pieces here and simply access them in this cell. So what we can do is just take this piece here and chain it in at the bottom. Now we don't need this df style anymore, and when we run this, we can see that it's applied the exact same cell formatting that we had before, making it much easier to be able to parse out what these numbers are actually representing. So one of the things you may want to do is actually highlight different ranges of data. So for example, if you wanted to be able to see all of the values that are between 50,000 and 100,000, rather than being able to just highlight a single value, you can actually highlight different ranges of values. And in order to do this, what we're going to do is use the highlight between method. So again, we're going to write df style, and then we're going to use the highlight between method. And so what we want to do is access the values between 50,000 on the left side and on the right side 100,000. So what this will do is highlight the values between 50 to 100,000. So let's see what happens when we run this. In this case, it's throwing an error because we actually need to declare the subset of columns. In this case, it can't find the ranges of values between these values when we're looking at string columns. So because these values we know only exist in the sum sales column, we can target only that column here. So what we can see here, it's applied this formatting here to be able to parse out any values between 50 and 100,000. In some cases, you'll want to look at different ranges of values, again, without knowing what the values actually represent. And so this is where the highlight quantiles method comes in. And so what we can do here is take a look at an example here. So we're going to highlight quantiles, and we're going to use the QLeft argument here and take 25, and the QRight argument and pass in 0.75. So what this will do is only highlight values that exist between 25% of the values and 75% of the values. So it's going to look at the distribution of these values. So in this case, we can actually apply this to all of the numeric columns because it's looking at it relative to that column rather than at exact values like the highlight between method does. So in this case, we're going to pass in subset, and we're going to pass in numeric columns again. So when we run this, and it's actually the highlight quantile method. So we're going to change this here without the S. So one of the things you may want to be able to do is pass in different values based on different ranges. And sometimes, of course, you can do this using these methods here, but you can actually define custom formatting functions as well. So say we wanted to apply only to this num sales column here, that if the number of sales was below 50, we color it red. Between 50 and 100, it's colored orange, and then anything else above that is green. So what we can do here is to define a function that will take a single parameter, the value of that column. So what we're going to say is add color, and it's just going to take the value X. And then we're going to compare the value of X and return a different color if that's the case. So we're going to say if X less than 50, color equals red. Else if X less than 100, give it the value of orange. And otherwise, if it's anything else, set the color equal to green. So what we want to do now is actually return a string that applies the different colors to our color. So what we can do now is return this F string here, where the background is that color that we return. And then we can use the apply map method in order to be able to apply this function to a given column. So let's take a look at what this looks like. We can write df_style dot apply map, and we're going to use the add color function here. We're not actually going to write the double parentheses because we only want the function object here. And then we're going to use the subset here of the num sales column. And then when we run this, we can see that it's actually applied this different formatting based on the values, based on the function that we're calling here. So one other thing you may want to do is be able to apply color maps in order to be able to create these really great heat maps of your data. So matplotlib provides a number of different really helpful color maps. So for example, what we can do is apply one of these gradient color maps in order to be able to visualize the distribution of our data in different ways. So let's take a look at how to do this. So we're going to use df_style, and in this case we're going to use the text gradient method, and we're going to use this color map parameter. We're going to pass in this pink, yellow, and green color map, which is a divergent color map. And we're only going to apply this again to the subset of our numeric columns. So let's take a look at what this looks like. We can see that it's applied this really great coloring scheme here. One thing that you can notice right off the bat is that some of these become quite difficult to read. And so because of this, it may actually be beneficial not to apply this text gradient, but instead apply this background gradient method. So when we run this, we can actually see that the entire background is colored, and it changes the font color depending on the values in order to make sure there's enough contrast. One of the other things we can do is actually use Seaborn color palettes. So what we can do here is use import Seaborn first, and then we can load in a color map here. And what we can do is use the light palette here in green and load it in as a color map so that we can actually use this throughout our visualizations here. And so we can take this piece here now and simply change the color map that we want to use. In this case, we want to use this variable that we just defined. And when we run this, we can see that we get to really granularly use these great color maps that Seaborn provides in its palettes. So in this section, we're going to take a look at adding bars to our data frames. And so this allows us to really be able to visualize the distribution of our data in really meaningful ways. So the way that this works is actually just by using the bar method. So we can do df_style as we've done before and call this bar method. And so what we want to do now is pass in a color, and say we want to use light green in this case so we don't get that atrocious yellow. We only want to target the numeric columns again. And so when we run this, we can see that it's actually applied these really great bars in here. Now, at first glance, it can be a little difficult to figure out how these bars are determined. And the way that this works is actually by being able to modify the starting values of what we're doing. So let's take this code and paste it into here. And what we now want to do is actually change this align parameter here. And what we can do is say left. And so this is actually the exact same thing that we had before because this is the default parameter. So Pandas provides a number of different ways in order to be able to do this. And one of the most intuitive ways is actually by using the zero argument here. So what this does is it makes sure that 0 is located at the center of the cell. And so this really means that it forces the entire distribution to be left aligned based on 0 being in that starting position and formatting out from there. And so another really good one to use is this mid value, where it forces the distribution to have the center point being the middle. So in this case, the maximum value will actually take up the entire stretch of it, and you're able to see how values relate to that maximum value in a really meaningful way. So one of the really great things that you can actually do with this too is work with negative values. So what we're going to do is just insert some negative values into our data frame. So I'm going to import numpy as np, and then we're just going to add a new column in here. And we're just going to use the linspace function here and go from -100 to 100, and we're going to say that we want it to be the length of our data frame. So when we look at the head of our data frame, just to see what it looks like now, we have these values ranging from a -100 to +100. So what we can do now is actually pass in that style attribute again, or the style method. And let's only take a look at, in this case, at the negatives column here. And so this is quite interesting because it's doing exactly what we want it to do, or what we're telling it to do, but it's not exactly what we want it to do. So in this case, it might actually be nice to show different colors depending on the sign of the value in this column, so that negative values could be red and positive values could be green, for example. And we can do this by passing in the color parameter again and passing in a list of functions here, so a list of values. So we can pass in red and green here. And so this now applies this really nice coloring. But again, we can take this a step further by having the negative values be on the left side of it, so that the -100 is a much larger negative bar in the left direction. And so the way that we can do this is by using that 0 alignment. So let's pass in align equals 0. So that places the 0 at the middle of where that bar starts. And in this case, we can see that -100 is actually the largest bar in the negative direction here, while +100 is the largest bar in the positive direction. So in this case, we've now defined a lot of different styles. And what you may want to do is be able to apply these different styles to data frames that are very similar in size and shape and contain the same columns without needing to define all these styles every single time, because it can be quite tedious. So what we can do, and let's just put together one of our earlier styles here. So say that we have this style here defined, and when we want to apply it to a new data frame, we don't want to type all of these columns out again, especially if we change one, we don't want to change it in all the other ones. What we can actually do is assign this style declaration here to a variable. So what we can actually do is call this df style is equal to this. So now when we access df style, it's going to contain all of this information in here. And so what we can do then actually is reuse it in a new data frame. So let's just make a copy of our original data frame using the copy method here. So now we have two data frames that look exactly the same and share the same structure. So what we can do now is actually call the use method and use the style that we just saved into here. So we can call df style and then use the export method here. And in this case, it's actually applying that styling exactly as we wanted to based on the style in the first data frame that we exported. So that brings us to the end of today's tutorial. If you enjoyed it or learned anything new, please feel free to leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, and if you haven't yet subscribed, consider subscribing to receive new videos just like this one. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.